Welcome to part 6 of this series, where I'm going to be walking you through an individual branch of my family in order to tell you exactly what I know, what I don't know about them, and the process that I went through in order to get to where I am. And the reason I'm doing this series is I think it's really important to give you folks a really good understanding of how each individual family line requires different tactics and strategies, and hopefully you'll be able to implement some of these tactics and strategies into your own research. The family line I'm talking about this time is my Sorokin line. And on the last episode I talked about my Kushner family from Daugavpils, Latvia. And my great-great-grandfather, Reuben Kushner, he was married to a woman named Julia Sorokin. And as we're going to get into on the episode, her family came from what is in the modern-day Lithuania, but actually before then they may have come from another town nearby that was in modern-day Belarus. I'm Yona Paley, and I believe genealogy is fun. And on today's episode, I'm going to be walking you through my Sorokin, or formerly Soroko or Soroka family, and show you how I learned about this branch. Now, I knew that my great-great-grandmother was named Julia Sorokin, and from her gravestone it was really easy to learn the name of her father, because it lists her Hebrew name as Yehudit, daughter of Baruch Leib. So I knew already from the bat that Baruch Leib Sorokin was my third great-grandfather, but I didn't know anything else about the family. I didn't know whether Julia had any siblings, or where in Europe the family came from. All I knew is that Julia came to the United States around the same time as her husband, and that they had married sometime in Europe before coming to America. Now, this line of my family research sat dormant for a number of years, and I kind of figured that there just wasn't anything that was going to give me any answers. Because like I said, I had looked through the name Sorokin, it was showing up. I didn't know if it was the original last name, maybe it had some other variation, like Sorkin or something else. And finally, I began taking genealogy a lot more seriously, and I started tracking down cousins and contacting them. So at this time, I had started learning about some siblings of Julia's, and I was getting more serious about contacting distant cousins and trying to get information from them to see if they knew anything about the Sorokin line. And I was really lucky because I got in touch with a distant cousin, and she told me that not only did she know who Baruch Leib was, he came to the United States. And what I learned is that he died in the 1920s from being hit by a car on his way home from synagogue. So this was already a huge revelation to me. I had no idea that any generations past my great-great-grandmother had even come to America. So that was step number one. The second thing was that I learned that his wife's name was Adel, and we'll get to into that in just a second. And then the third thing was, as it turns out, she actually had a photo of Baruch Leib and Adel, which she sent to me. And you can actually see right here, this is a photo of my third great-grandfather, Baruch Leib Sorokin. Luckily, at this point, I had also become really good at finding ship manifests for my relatives, and from finding the manifest for my Kushner family, specifically my great-grandfather, Max or Matis, and his mother, Julia. So it was all of the Kushner siblings. And then if you looked a couple of lines down on the manifest, well, there was a couple named Baruch and Adel Soroko. So now I kind of had this last name that was a little bit different from Sorokin, Soroka, or Soroko, as we're going to get into. And this was the first step in figuring out who they were, because It mentioned that they came from Vilnius, okay? So then I went about trying to trace Borichleb and Adel, and pretty soon I found their death certificates as well as their gravestones, which helped me go back a further generation on both of their lines. Now, I want to take a side note to mention that Adel, it's interesting because I don't actually know what her last name is. Many of her kids list different last names on different certificates, so there's a number of different last names that she could have. And because of this, and there doesn't seem to be any consensus, for now in my tree, I just have her as Adel and her father's name, which was Abraham. But I don't put her last name down because there are too many conflicting sources of information. And there's a similar instance last time around when I talked about my Kushner line. Reuben, his mother, and also his grandmother, I had their first names, but unfortunately, because I didn't have their last names, I decided not to do an episode on them until I can figure out what their surnames are. So anyways, from finding Borichleb's gravestone, I could see that he was the son of Tzvi, and his death certificate, combined with the fact that Tzvi is usually the Hebrew version of Hirsch, made me realize that my fourth great-grandfather on my Sorokan or Soroko line was named Hirsch. And from using this name, I managed to look through the Vilnius records, and it turns out there was a Soroko family, a pretty sizable family, who all seem to come from a town in modern-day Lithuania called Svencionys. And some of these records indeed did have a Borichleb. There were some death records for some of his children who had died. And indeed, there were some records for a Hirsch Soroko, born around 1798, from Svencionys, and he seems to be the only one. And according to a lot of the names that he gave his kids and his grandkids gave it, it seems pretty clear that this is Hirsch, the father of Borichleb. Hirsch was born around 1798, and Borichleb was born in the 1850s. So it's quite possible that Borichleb was one of the later children that Hirsch had. I couldn't really find any other children for this particular person, but it does seem from Borichleb's death certificate that his mother was named Minnie Stein, or Minna Stein. Another person who I won't yet be doing a video on because that is the only name I have for that surname, and I don't know 100% that it's true, but if it is, and if indeed this is the Hirsch who is the father of Borichleb, my guess is that she was probably his second wife, unless he just didn't get married till his 50s and only had one kid, which is possible, but it's not something that I've seen very often. Sadly, there are a lot of gaps in the Svencionys records, and indeed this caused some confusion because Hirsch is listed as being the son of Moshe. So we now have one more generation back. That would be my fifth great-grandfather, Moshe Soroko. Now there was some confusion because originally I thought that Moshe was the son of a Borichleb. There was a Moshe, or a Moshe Leib, the son of Baruch, Soroko, and a lot of these names kept popping up that I recognized from the family line, and I said, oh, it must be his father. But unfortunately, there are actually more than one Moshe Soroko from Svencionys who could be the father. And for this reason, there just isn't enough info to narrow down which one of these, if any, is the father of Hirsch. So for this reason, I'm actually stopping the ascendancy tree with Moshe, the father of Hirsch, because I don't know which Moshe it is. But there is some good news in this situation, and that is the fact that there is an 1811 census record for a Moshe Soroko living in Svencionys. I don't know if it's the same one as on this tree. It's an 1811 census, which is really, really early, and it says that the family originally came from Mikalishki, which is a town in modern-day Belarus, and it's actually pretty close to Svencionys. And I have looked through the Mikalishki records, and indeed, there is a Sharakan family, spelled kind of similar to the last name Sorokin. And originally I wasn't sure if this was the same family, but given a lot of the names that keep cropping up, very peculiar names like Kasriel and Borachleb and things like this, I am pretty confident that this is the same family, but unfortunately due to some gaps in the records, I haven't been able to link together everyone on these branches. So for now I'm keeping these lists of people in my back pocket, but I do believe, given the fact that there are a lot of records from both Svencionys and Mikalishki dating back even to the late 1700s, that if I can one day fill some of these gaps, this could actually end up being one of my most successful far back trees, because there are people on these family lists dating back to the early 1700s, so that were born in the early 1700s, and I think it's pretty likely that one of them is my direct ancestor, but it's just that sometimes you just have too many people with the same name and not enough data to really narrow down who is the father of whom. So this is a branch that I think I've learned quite a bit on, but I know there are people who are related to me. It can be a little bit frustrating sometimes not to be able to fit everybody together, but that's just the situation with this family. You know, sometimes you have all the records going far back and you can just trace it back no problem. Other times you have nothing. In this case, there is a lot, but there are gaps. Like everything in genealogy, it's important to be patient because you never know what new records can be released. I happen to be the member of a couple of special interest groups through Litfoxig, which they often will release new records from specific regions of Lithuania, and this includes places like Svencionys or Vilnius. So what I'm doing is I'm subscribing to these special interest groups, and then hopefully in the future, when they find more records relevant to my family line, I'll hopefully be able to learn more about them. And there you have it. That's what I know about my Soroko or Sorokin line from Svencionys, Lithuania, probably originally from Mikalishki, Belarus. If you like this episode, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the YouTube channel. As always, I'm looking forward to bringing you more videos about famous Jews, as well as tips and tricks that you can use in your own genealogy research. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll get you next time.